They didn't die from cannon fire. They didn't die from sword wounds on a sun-drenched deck. The thing that killed more pirates than any naval battle, any rival crew, or any vengeful merchant fleet was something far more ordinary and far more terrifying. It was a cold, wet night at sea. Picture it. You are somewhere in the North Atlantic. The year is 1698. The sun has just dropped below the horizon, and within 20 minutes, the temperature has fallen 10 degrees. Your clothes are soaked through from the afternoon spray. The wind has picked up, and you have nowhere warm to go. This is the story that pirate movies never tell you. This is the secret to surviving ice-cold nights aboard a pirate ship. And some of the details are almost too brutal to believe. The first thing to understand is why the cold at sea hits so much harder than cold on land. A temperature reading doesn't tell the full story when you're 40 miles from shore on open water. On land, buildings break the wind. Trees absorb moisture. The ground radiates stored warmth. At sea, there is nothing between you and the atmosphere. Nothing at all. A night that might register as merely cool by a thermometer on dry land could, on open water, carry a wind chill that drove the felt temperature down by 15, sometimes 20 degrees. Sailors and pirates weren't just cold. They were cold in every direction, all at once, with no escape. Wind chill wasn't a term anyone used in the 17th century, but every experienced sailor understood the concept in their bones. Literally. The faster a ship moved, the more aggressive the wind became against exposed skin. Working the rigging at night, which pirates and sailors regularly had to do regardless of conditions, meant clinging to wet rope in the dark while the wind tore across your hands and face. Frostbite didn't require Arctic temperatures. It required wet skin, sustained wind, and exhaustion. All three were common on any ship pushing hard through rough seas, and pirate ships pushed hard almost constantly. Speed was survival. A pirate vessel that couldn't outrun a naval warship was a pirate vessel whose crew ended up hanged. That need for speed meant no slowing down at night, no dropping anchor in sheltered coves when a prize or a threat was on the horizon. The ship kept moving. The wind kept cutting. Now imagine what those ships actually looked like after dark. Forget every cinematic image of lantern-lit cabins with warm wooden interiors. The reality below, decks on a typical pirate sloop or brigantine of the late 1600s, was damp, dark, low-ceilinged, and smelled of salt water, unwashed bodies, bilge, and rotting provisions. The hull breathed moisture constantly. Condensation dripped from timbers. Seawater found its way through cracks and seams during rough weather, pooling on the lower decks. The men sleeping down there weren't sleeping on bunks. Most slept in hammocks, strung tightly between beams or hooks, swinging gently with the movement of the ship. The hammock itself was a reasonable piece of maritime engineering. Adopted from Caribbean indigenous peoples and widely used by naval and pirate crews alike by the 1600s, the canvas hammock kept a man off the wet deck and allowed him to swing with the ship's motion rather than being thrown around. In warm weather, it worked well enough. But on a cold night, canvas is not your friend. Canvas breathes. It holds moisture. If your hammock had been soaked during the day, and it likely had been, sleeping in it was like wrapping yourself in a cold, damp sail. Blankets, where they existed, were typically made of coarse wool. Wool has one genuine advantage. It retains some warmth even when wet, a quality that would have saved lives. But pirate crews were not naval crews. They did not have standard issue kit. What a pirate had on a cold night depended entirely on what he had managed to acquire through plunder, trade, or personal resourcefulness. Some men had nothing but the clothes on their backs. If this surprises you, make sure to subscribe, because the next detail is even more sobering. Clothing itself was a crisis. 17th and early 18th century sailors wore linen shirts, woolen coats or jackets when they had them, and whatever breeches or trousers they'd managed to keep intact. Leather was occasionally used for outer garments. None of this was waterproof in any meaningful sense. After a day of work on deck, hauling lines, climbing rigging, manning the helm through spray and rain, a man's clothing was saturated. And saturated clothing against skin in cold wind doesn't just fail to keep you warm. It actively pulls warmth out of your body. The physics are brutal. Wet fabric conducts heat away from skin far more efficiently than dry fabric or even bare skin in open air. A pirate standing watch in a soaked wool coat on a cold night was losing body heat faster than he could generate it. Rain and storms compounded everything. A squall in the Atlantic or off the Carolina coast didn't just bring discomfort. It brought hours of hammering precipitation that soaked every surface, drove below decks through hatches, and left men shivering in wet hammocks for the rest of the night. Even in tropical waters, which many pirates favored, nighttime temperatures after a storm could drop sharply. The Caribbean gave pirates warm days and unpredictable nights. Anyone who has spent a January night in the Bahamas in open air without shelter knows this. Imagine that same chill, soaking wet, on a moving ship. So how did they actually survive? The answer is layered, and some of it is counterintuitive. Body heat sharing was one of the most powerful tools available. Below decks, men slept close together by necessity. The ship was simply too crowded for personal space. A typical pirate sloop might carry 40 to 60 men in a space designed for far fewer. That crowding, miserable as it was in other ways, produced collective warmth. Bodies are furnaces. Enough of them in an enclosed space will raise the ambient temperature meaningfully. Sailors instinctively understood this, even if they couldn't articulate the thermodynamics. Experienced men chose their sleeping positions carefully. Deep in the ship, surrounded by others, away from hatches and hull seams. Imagine experiencing this yourself. Pressed into a dark space that smells of sweat and salt, the ship groaning around you, rain hammering the deck above your head, and the only warmth in the world coming from the men packed in beside you. This was not romantic. It was survival mathematics. Fires aboard wooden ships were almost unthinkably dangerous. A ship's cook might maintain a small enclosed stove or firebox in the galley for meal preparation. But this was extinguished during bad weather and was never a general source of warmth for the crew. Pirates did not gather around fires at night. There were no fires at night. The darkness was absolute below decks. The cold was real, and the heat source, such as it was human. Now about rum. The legend that alcohol kept sailors warm has been romantically repeated for centuries. The truth is more complicated and more dangerous. Let us know in the comments whether you've heard this before. Alcohol does produce an immediate sensation of warmth by dilating blood vessels near the skin surface. But that dilation accelerates heat loss. You feel warmer for 20 minutes, and then you are physiologically colder than you were before you drank. Experienced sailors understood this instinctively, even without the science. Rum was comfort, and it was cultural currency, and it dulled the psychological misery of a long, cold night. But it was not insulation. Men who drank heavily on cold watches and then fell asleep in exposed positions sometimes didn't wake up. Hypothermia in the 17th century had no clinical name, but sailors knew what it looked like. A man who stopped shivering when he should still be cold was in trouble. A man whose speech slurred, whose coordination failed, whose mind went strange and slow. These were recognized signs that something was very wrong, even if nobody could explain the physiology. Experienced crews knew to keep moving, to keep watch rotations short in brutal conditions, to force food and liquid into a man who was fading. Caloric intake mattered enormously. A body burning energy to maintain temperature needs fuel, salt pork, hardtack, whatever dried provisions the cook could distribute. These weren't just nutrition. They were heat production. The difference between a tropical run and a voyage through northern waters was the difference between hardship and potential death. Pirates who worked the warm shipping lanes between the Caribbean islands dealt with cold primarily at night and primarily in storm season. Pirates who ranged further into the North Atlantic chasing merchant traffic or along the American colonial coastline in late autumn entered a different category of danger entirely. These men needed heavier clothing, better blankets, more caloric density in their food, and experienced crew leadership that understood cold weather seamanship. Newcomers died disproportionately. Men who had grown up on tropical islands and signed aboard a pirate crew for adventure found the reality of a North Atlantic night in November to be a profound and sometimes fatal education. The psychological toll deserves its own recognition. Cold is not just physical. Hours of darkness, hours of wet discomfort, hours of shivering with no relief and no privacy and nowhere to go. This hollows a person out. Experienced sailors developed a kind of stoic patience that newcomers called madness. They moved less, conserved energy, retreated into themselves. They learned to sleep through discomfort that would keep a landsman awake for hours. This adaptation took years. It was bought with suffering. The romanticized image of the pirate, the dashing figure on a sunlit deck, sword in hand, treasure on his mind, is one of history's most successful fictions. The reality was a cold, exhausted man in wet clothes, lying in a damp canvas hammock in the dark, listening to the sea try to get inside the ship, wondering if he was going to wake up warm. Most nights he did. Some nights, someone didn't. And that unglamorous, uncinematic truth is what made the men who survived it something genuinely remarkable. Not heroes of adventure, but survivors of something most of us, in our warm beds tonight, will never come close to understanding.